Certainly, going along from one crisis to the next is no way to run a life, or for that matter, an economy, which is basically the lives of everybody together. So, how do we produce stability? Certainly, the foundation of stability would be a currency which is based on equity, not debt, something that could go up and down and have deflation. That's a good start. But what else might it take? One example can be found in, well, this is from the Czech Republic, but let's go back before there were the koruna. This is 200 koruna, about $8. Let's go back to the time of Bohemia, the medieval kingdom. See, in the town of Joachimsthal, they discovered they had a lot of silver, high quality silver. And what they did very wisely was, rather than just dig it up out of the ground and sell it off, they decided to add a lot of value and really give the market what it needed. And they produced coins that were of high quality, very highly standardized, and everybody could completely rely on them. They became known as the Joachimsthaler because they were from Joachimsthal. And they became a standard throughout Europe. Uh, Also became known as simply thalers, which is where we get the word dollar. What they were doing was basically giving the market what it needed, and in the process, defining the marketplace. They were the standard for everything. And this very much allowed the little tiny kingdom of Bohemia to punch far above its weight through most of the medieval period. Now, this was a time when stability was the norm. We had kingdoms and empires and so on, and life went along without a lot of interruption. Today, we live in a world of disruptive technologies, which are disruptive. And we get more of them all the time. I mean, the foundation of capitalism is risk management, being able to predict what's going to happen in the future. And a technology based world is a world that is constantly changing. Where possible, we need to have good, firm foundations to build things on so that those disruptions are more manageable. But we also need to have a system that is stable, but dynamically so. And when you talk about dynamic stability, you're really talking about the market and making the market work more efficiently. And that is where the lessons of Bohemia, the Czech Republic, become important. Because markets are not something that comes up naturally. They are created. Okay, they are a human social construction. This might seem obvious. I mean, dogs don't create markets, humans do. But we often forget about that because markets do spring up spontaneously, especially within a culture where everybody has the same ideas about what fairness is and so on, or what, for that matter, money is. And there are ways that a government can encourage the market. First of all, by having a stable currency like the Joachimsthaler, or for that matter, the US dollar as it used to exist. Well, it's not so stable now, and that's really the problem. See, having a currency that people don't really know what it is or where it comes from only makes things worse. And it almost guarantees that you're going to go along from one crisis to the next. I hope that you're tired of it because I certainly am. How do we create dynamic stability? Well, if markets are actually created in a sense, as we get new technologies and new ways of doing things, we're going to have new markets that have to be created from scratch. That can be complicated. The best way to do this is through some sort of regulation that creates a level playing field. Now, everybody has their opinions about regulation. The argument usually goes we have too much regulation or we have too little regulation. I'm going to say that this whole argument is complete nonsense. The absolute volume of regulation doesn't matter one bit. It's whether or not the regulation is effective. I know that sounds like I'm running for office, but what is a good regulation? If you believe in the dynamic stability that is created by a functioning, efficient market, The best regulations are those that make the market more efficient, which is to say, they tackle known problems in the market, market failures. I discussed some of those in the healthcare section, where you have just so many market failures that there's no way to know where to begin. But for most common things, it's a little more obvious. And regulation can take some basic forms. First of all, there is disclosure. This is the foundation of all regulation. I mean, for example, when you buy a can of soup or something, it has nutritional facts listed. The government doesn't tell them what can be put in the soup or anything like that. They simply say what has to be on it. So if you're on a low sodium diet, nope, not buying this. It gives you the ability to make the choice. And this gets around a classic market failure of informational asymmetry, where the consumer knows far less about the product than the one selling it. The next level up would be standardization. We call this a level 2 regulation, where there are so many things that kind of go together in one thing that you have to have a shorthand, a way of doing it. A good example are fasteners, screws. I mean, we have a number 8 screw, which is a certain size, a certain thread space, a certain tensile strength, things like this. It became very important to have this standardization when certain other countries were making really cheap screws, cheap fasteners that were failing. I mean, we need to have fasteners that work for industrial purposes. So, standardization. If you're going to call it a number 8 screw, it's got to have these technical characteristics. That's a sort of a level 2. Level 3 would be performance, where you regulate that a certain thing has to be done. Pollution is a good example of that. A lot of regulation around pollution is, look, as long as you don't put anything into the air, we don't care what's happening. If something comes out and there's a monitor in place of some kind, then you better take care of it fast. Those guys with the orange jumpsuits better show up, take care of it, or you're going to get fined. But that's a performance-based standard. A fourth level then would be a method. All cars must have catalytic converters. You can see that as you go from that disclosure all the way up to method, that you're having different levels, but we can regulate which level we're at based on what kind was going to be the best thing for the market at the time and is going to make the markets more efficient. Now, all regulation is essentially a form of tax, requiring people to do certain things. Disclosure is a very low kind of tax, not a big problem. A method would be a more serious one. Performance, you get to choose how you do it. But it levels the playing field, so everybody has the same tax essentially. And if the market efficiencies that are gained by having everything work properly and taking care of, say, the externalities caused by pollution by prescribing a performance, then the net efficiency outweighs the cost of the tax. And that is a way to make a system that is more dynamically stable by using market forces and paying attention to them and defining the market so that everybody is operating in the same level and going forward. Now, one of the great places where market instability happens is in labor markets. They are a classic place for failure, simply because the skills that are necessary to have jobs take some time to acquire, or people may not be in the right location for the job. If you can't do it remotely, then you've got to be there at the plant. So how do you find the workers for the location? Labor markets are inherently inflexible. And that's by design. I mean, we have our lives to live, right? One way around this is by encouraging flexibility in the labor market. As I've said before, 25% of all workers in the US now are contract. And that is great if it works well for the employer and the employee. But there are different sets of laws for those. We have not yet really redefined that. And this is very true in the United States, but I think it's true all around the world. Understanding what contract work is and being a different level of employee causes a whole bunch of different regulations to come into play. For example, Uber drivers are being having been complaining about the fact, they're directed entirely by Uber, but they are contractors, and many of them aren't even making minimum wage at times. Well, the state of California has said to Uber, we're going to sue you to force you to comply with the regulations that they are employees, not contractors. Why? Because we don't have a body of law that regulates contractors in the right way, that makes the most sense to protect those workers. See, as much as we might want to talk about money or regulations or any of these other things, it really comes down to people, whether they are workers or they are consumers. The more that they are able to compete on a level playing field, the better the market is going to function. Most commonly, this comes down to information, disclosure. And one thing the government can do for labor markets is give us good information. I mean, we talk about, the unemployment rate today was 4.1%. It's kind of a meaningless number. That's what we call U4. But U8 is a broader number that shows unemployment for bigger people. No one ever talks about that. But even that isn't very useful. I mean, what if we had compiled information that said to you, rather than 4.1%, what if we told you today it was reported that in your city there is a net shortage of welders, there is a net shortage of QC technicians, and their salaries are going up. The number of jobs that have been opened up for this are going up dramatically. That would be useful information that workers, consumers, can use, and it would make the markets more efficient. See, this is where government can help: regulation and developing information. Markets are indeed created. And if we pay attention to the concept of a dynamic stability, we have something that can go through all of the very disruptive technologies or disruptive events and not fundamentally break. It does start with having a stable currency, something that has a good foundation. The Karuna, well, it's not quite the Joachimsthaler, is it? But it's something. From there, building on the concept, giving the market what it needs, really adding some value to the market's information. That's what really counts. It's really what disruptive technologies are all about: anticipating the market needs and delivering them before anybody expects them. Disruptive technologies can be disruptive, but if we have that same attitude, that same mindset, we can develop a dynamically stable system. We're not going back to the system where silver coins are the way to go. We've just simply outgrown that. And I know that there are a lot of people who long for those good old days when you could have that level of stability. We need to have a dynamic stability. And that means market forces. Market forces which are sometimes inefficient, but if we pay attention, we can devise systems that make them more efficient. That's the key to moving forward and getting away from one crisis to the next. Thank you.